Like all other maps, this is a drawing to scale of a portion of the Earth's surface on which natural and man-made features are depicted by symbols, lines, and colors. If you select a map which covers the area of your travels and know how to interpret the information it contains...
Maps have been used by societies from around the world for many centuries and have helped shape the way that we view resources, space, and human connections to the land and sea. Historically, mapping was the preserve of the powerful, royalty, governments, explorers, and the military.
After many days of travel in equatorial heat, we climbed to the summit of the Banaugi Mountains. Below is the Tanganyika Valley of Lions.
Over time, those experts creating maps developed conventions and norms to compare data and share spatial information. A common spatial language slowly developed and spread throughout the world as these powers mapped the lands they ruled over. Maps have changed the way in which we interact and perceive our Earth. They've helped create order and structure the way that we understand our world. But with the immense power to shape and define different versions of reality, they have also contributed to conflict and injustice. The apparent facts presented by the objective face of a map are persuasive, yet they mask a subjective agenda lying beneath the colors and symbols. With every map there is a creator, and the map reflects their needs and motives, and with this, the power to define and delineate the lands presented on it. Today, anyone can access spatial information. Using maps in paper form or on the internet, the world can be viewed in great detail by those who historically have had no access to this wealth of spatial knowledge. As we enter the 21st century, geospatial information technologies are evolving like never before. We have open access to public domain mapping technology of a high quality. Mapping no longer needs to be the preserve only of governments, but is rapidly becoming a medium which almost any person can both access and use. The future of maps is changing, as is their potential to address pressing social and environmental concerns and aspirations. Today's globalized world demands an ability to communicate knowledge and ideas in a certain way, within established legal and political frameworks and in a language that is understood by official bodies. Being a part of this system and being able to communicate within it requires layers of acquired knowledge, behavioral norms, the written word, computer skills, and regulatory environments, to mention a few. Some are better equipped to express themselves in this system, and not surprisingly, others are excluded, alienated, and disempowered.
Many of these groups have lived on the land for generations, facing encroachment on their lands by logging companies and companies.
Local knowledge is still not accepted enough, it's not sufficiently accepted in questions of land rights, land entitlements, good practice and natural resource management.
So we've got ourselves into a situation where there are people who are living at one lifestyle level where they're extracting a great deal of natural resources from the planet, fossil fuels, minerals, wood, other resources, and there are other people who have lived as custodians of those resources, and now there's a crisis.
Across the globe, from the depths of the Amazon rainforest to the hills of Siberia, local communities, many of whom still observe traditional practices, are beginning to feel the burden of these changes. From claims on their land and resources to the erosion of culture and tradition, the probability of exclusion and disempowerment for these communities, who have very little command of the language of globalization, is great. Providing the tools and the practices to help bridge this communication gap is a key goal for the PGIS community of practice. Through the 1970s, development practice gave little importance to the abilities of local communities of being involved in problem solving. The thinking generally was that outside agencies knew better and that local communities didn't have the capacities or education to be of much use.
In the 70s, we outsiders, professionals, we used to find out about rural situations using questionnaire surveys or with social anthropological techniques. Then we became very frustrated with that, so we started inventing all sorts of other methods. One of the things that we were doing trying to understand about an environment was to go in and make a sketch map. So we would make sketch maps. Then we began to realize it was a real breakthrough that people could make their own maps. And mapping became the way in which we started participatory rural appraisal activities normally, because people love making maps.
To be increasingly effective in communicating spatial issues, participatory mapping evolved over time, from drawing lines in the sand or sketching on large sheets of paper, to using theodolites and measuring tapes, and later on, global positioning systems or GPS. By the turn of the century, significant changes took place in the world of mapping as information technology was changing the way that maps were being made and used. The digitization of spatial data made them more accessible, shareable, and usable. As the access to data and technology increased, the opportunities for their use within bottom-up development contexts became more attractive. Practitioners, activists, and researchers from around the world began to look at the application of mapping in a different light. In essence, innovative technologies offered an opportunity for gathering, analyzing, visualizing, and sharing spatial information via a medium which could attract the attention and respect of decision and policymakers, and could at the same time be a true expression of the people who made the maps. Now, the toolbox is vast. Traditional surveying instruments and more advanced GPS devices, 3D models, remote-sensed imagery, online geotagging, and other Web 2 technologies. Making such technologies available to disadvantaged groups has offered them the opportunity to enhance their capacity in addressing their perceived problems and aspirations, and to communicate more effectively. Participatory GIS practice is the result of a merger of participatory learning and action methods with geographic information technologies. Mapping methods range from those that require very few resources, such as ground maps, to those using sophisticated technologies and equipment, such as remote-sensed imagery. A broad selection of mapping and communication tools is nowadays available to address map-making purposes, taking into consideration locally available resources and skills.
PGIS gives local and indigenous communities the possibility to put the knowledge of the land, the resources and the space into a language that others can understand. One page, for example, of map talks louder than 10 pages of writing. It gives much more power to local communities. With the help of PGIS, the indigenous communities gain confidence and other people have much more respect from them, and it's open a way to discussion and to solutions.
So it's local people themselves using their own terminology, drawing it visually so that they can sit around in a group and look at it together in color.
This mapping process, it's a way to awake people and make them realize that they are the ones who can make the changes. So it's a self-organizing process. They are the ones who make their own questions, they are the ones who make their own maps, and they are the ones who would be using their maps to strengthen their own process.
If appropriately used, PGIS practice can contribute to community empowerment, innovation, and social change. However, it may also trigger unintended and potentially negative consequences. As an example, locating sensitive information on maps may open the doors to abuse and misuse. Likewise, the drawing of a line on a map to exemplify a border may ignite conflict. Though PGIS processes may lead to diverging impacts, there are ways to ensure that risks are mitigated and that the process is mindful and ethically correct. PGIS practice is not based on rigid process, and there is no blueprint approach fitting all situations. Usually, it is based on demand-driven, community-centered processes facilitated by a trusted technology intermediary. The committee and intermediaries need to be open and transparent on their own agendas and how these may complement each other and or diverge.
Basic to the issues around behaviour, attitudes and ethics are what are called the who and the whose questions. The fundamental ones are really whose reality is being expressed, who is being empowered, who is being disempowered, who gains and who loses. And those questions can be asked all the way through. It's really always important to ask about the realities that are being expressed and whose they are, and then what effect their expression is going to have. The questions about who's going to use the information, who's going to have access to it, is also a question to be asked all the way through. But underlying this is a very, very basic attitude, which is critical. It's they can do it. When we have confidence that people can do it, they will show what they can do. If we don't have confidence that they can do it, they will feel disempowered. They will feel, I've got to learn it from you. I can't invent it or create it for myself. I have to be dependent on you. You're the teacher, you're the good. I need to learn from you. There's another expression that we've got, which we use a lot. Hand over the stick comes from the early days of participatory mapping, the early 90s. Because very often you would be standing around and saying, can they come out? And people would be sort of standing there like this. We can't make a map, we don't know. That's what you educated people can do. And then you have a stick and you start, you say, well, look, I mean, well, what about that? There's a road over there. And then you just draw the road, a little bit of the road. And then you hand the stick to somebody. You actually physically hand the stick. And they take the stick and then they start. And then it just takes off. And then you have to stand back and not interfere. People will show what they want to show, what's important to them. People will correct one another. And it builds up a composite picture of their community or whatever it is that they want to map. So the attitudes which go, they can do it, and with hand over the stick are fundamental. And they're very difficult for a lot of professionals because we're taught to teach. We're taught something and then we have the idea that we go and we teach that to other people. It's not like that at all. It's a very, very different sort of being, a very, very different sort of relating to people, to be a facilitator compared to being a teacher. But the danger with all this is getting too complicated and making it all seem too difficult. Oh my gosh, you know, there are something like 30 or 40 who's questions. I've got to have that checklist, I've got to tick through it and ask myself all these questions. It's not like that. It should be being aware that there are a lot of issues like this and continuously reflecting on the process as it goes forward. And it's much more dependent on the sensitivity, intelligence, awareness, commitment of the person who's facilitating.
The mapping process does not necessarily have a set time frame. The map generally emerges over the course of the process and then evolves with a life of its own. While it's important to be aware of the non-restrictive chronology of the practice, it can be useful to think of it in three main phases. A community groundwork phase including planning, the mapping itself including spatial data collection, analysis and visualization, and the phase following the completion of the maps. In other words, what is done with the maps and what happens next.
Those facilitating PGIS should always think about the best technology for the communities. Which kind of technology I will help the community to use? It's about giving the technology to the communities for them to use it. It is very important to look at the technology which suits the community, which enable the community to be able to use it.
A formidable challenge to realizing the potential that PGIS-related applications offer is the widespread lack of effective administrative mechanisms and structures. Although legislation in some countries has enabled the operation of PGIS practice, the lack of enabling environments, or even the presence of disabling regulatory instruments, presents a serious obstacle to PGIS adoption and application. Accordingly, it may be necessary to reconcile formal and traditional institutions to produce enabling environments that allow for effective PGIS application. Fundamental to this is the practice of good governance.
Good governance is about the relationships between the people who are providing the information into the PGIS and the people who are going to use it. And those people who are going to use it are the local people themselves, but they're also the outside agencies. So good governance concerns how those relationships are made. It means that there should be a respect on both sides as well. It's a two-way process of respect.
This is a very flexible methodology and an emergent methodology that it's inspired by the process of the local people. So you don't have like a fixed agenda, but you try to read and see what the process of the people have been and then create a methodology.
PGIS exercise or PGIS activities with communities is a long-term process. When you are planning, you should never do the planning alone. You should always involve communities that you are planning to help or with whom you are planning to work.
Once the process is initiated, then the design of a process should be more participatory rather than less participatory, which means that the local community should be involved in the design process, which aspects are going to be looked at, which resources are going to be looked at, what sort of boundaries are going to be included.
It's really important to understand things from their point of view, to see and to try to appreciate what they can gain out of the process. Who's participating in whose mapping? Whose map is it going to be? What is it going to be used for? Who can it empower? Who may it disempower? It may disempower people within the community. Those are fairly basic questions to ask at the beginning of a process, but then to continue to ask those questions as the process unfolds and emerges and evolves and develops.
What is extremely important is that whoever facilitates, that the technology intermediaries who are facilitating this process, build into the project design already a communication strategy, which can help map makers to communicate the grievances, their aspiration to those who are going to take decisions on how to go about that.
The processes, even though have a life on its own, it's important that somebody is leading and encouraging that. But it's those persons that are accompanying the process have to be really aware of how important it is to let chaos emerge, and then out of that chaos order comes and order emerges. So when they confront themselves with a blank piece of paper, probably not understanding what the questions are, and then they just feel comfortable and understand that they have the knowledge and they don't have to ask anybody else, it just comes, and people start writing and making questions and discussing and conversing between each other, even though confusion is still there. And that's how processes evolve, out of disorder and out of confusion.
Allowing people to find out for themselves what works and what doesn't work, rather than laying down absolutely fixed, rigid rules that do it this way, this way, this way, this way. That's very, very important.
You should never rush while doing participatory mapping or PGIS. You should never rush. You should take the time. It's time consuming. You should always take time to go there, to spend time with them, to build community confidence. It is not just about the technology, but it's also about how you behave with them. When you go to the communities, which kind of dress, how did you dress? where did you live? Did you come to the community and during the evening you go back to the big town to live? Or you come to the community, you spend time with them, you eat their food, you eat with them, you drink with them, you do everything with them. These are very key elements.
Maar die punt is, jullie moet de eis op de samen komen. So they must and er moet een verslag voor die
It shows that you are respecting them. It shows that you are not like others, and it makes all the difference.
After I go back, I will give this cyber tracker to Moses, and then he will download the information into his computer. All the information that I was doing by mapping.
Sometimes you tend to leave behind the tensions and the pain, but sometimes it's very important to bring that tension and that pain out so that people can really feel powerful again and not powerless, because things can't be changed.
Zino za varisa zdivi, risa bizo ringabva ngagara jina ngagara. Mara za zino, zosia richiwo diba zori ndila ndifiyo. Runezi yambori kudotingisana, ratusana, rainanrupanda. Zashu ndikobona zikidobwerera ngonani. Rite mutingati rote, rigagamise rivanji. Ngaurwa ziko ribalera.
Necesariamente se debe elaborar mapas, se debe investigar. De lo contrario no existe. De lo contrario pues no habría cambio. Difícilmente puede uno proponer una propuesta alterna frente al programa del Estado si no es por la investigación.
They have hope and they really think that they can do it together, and what they had been working is not nonsense, that it's beautiful and it's powerful and it's complex and it's as important as the Western knowledge.
The map should not be the end. Map is the beginning of a good PGIS process. One of our challenges now is to make sure that communities put in place processes that will continue.
What needs to be done is to ensure that maps are used to communicate efficiently. And that happens only if networking is added to map making, if communication is added to that, so that maps can be used to effectively establish a peer-to-peer dialogue with policymakers, decision makers.
Through communication technology, participatory videos, Web 2 technologies, and etc., this information is being shared out to the rest of the world. So mapping, communications go hand in hand to achieve common goals.
You should have cameras and all those things to take some copies of what you produce with communities and leave the originals in the community to make sure that community will keep on reflecting on it, but also they will feel confident because we are not coming to extract.
Depending on the target audience, you may package different messages, you may produce different media. But maps are always at the center. Maps visualize spatial knowledge, which is then localized.
And right at the end, one can ask, well, who gained and who lost? And why? And what can be done about it, if there's anything that's gone wrong?